Hello and welcome to this edition of Here We Are for our first show for 2010, the new decade, as they call it, 2010. I'm your host, Henry Cheatham, and we have a wonderful show for you today. I guess it's Mr. Howard Saffold going to be with us, but let me get into a little bit of my monologue. So my wife don't want me talking about the mayor anymore, but I'm going to do it anyway. You know, Mayor Washington, the great mayor of Chicago, I think one of the top 5 mayors of this country, as Mayor Washington, John Lindsay, Maynard Jackson, Hatchard, and probably Mayor Stokes, some of the great mayors that the country has had. And the Mayor Washington, they played in the last political election, the mayor firing acting Governor Quinn, as far as I'm concerned, because Blagojevich is still my governor. I voted for him. I didn't vote for Quinn. Excuse me. But anyway, Mayor Washington said that he would run this city from the grave. And folks, he's doing that, you know. I mean, they brought him out from the grave to show how he had fired the acting governor. Again, I would say that, what is his name? Pat Quinn, yeah. You know, Illinois politics, as far as I'm concerned, is a joke to the rest of the country. Mike Madigan, the head of the Democratic Party in this state, is like a spoiled child. If he doesn't get his way, he want to change the rules. He is now talking about eliminating, with the help of those dummies down in Springfield, the lieutenant governor's position. That's a constitutional position, and we, the people, will still have a final say as to what happens, even if the guys down in Springfield decide to go along with this guy. I don't know why this guy continues to be the head of the party when he constantly has done a bad job. He should have checked Cohen's out, who won the, everybody who was on that Democratic ticket should have been checked out by the Democratic leadership. And I believe they were. And they may have thought that some of this stuff was going to get by, but it didn't, you know. The Democrats have a right to put whomever they want to up for election. But we, the people, have a right to say whom we want for the position. Well, I think most of the people voted for Cohen, so maybe Cohen should be the guy to represent the state. I don't know. But anyway, we're going to get to our show. Our guest today is Mr. Howard Saffold. Many of you may know him as you watched the late Mayor Harold Washington. He was the head of security for Mayor Washington. He was one of the guys who kept the mayor in good shape, but they couldn't keep him from eating. The mayor gained quite a bit of weight, but he was a very effective mayor, very wonderful mayor. In the city of Chicago, I don't think will ever be as great as it was during that period of Mayor Harold Washington. Welcome, Brother Saffold, to our show.
My pleasure, Mr. Cheatham.
Give a little background on you, Mr. Saffold. Where did you go to high school?
Well, I was born and raised in the city of Chicago, on the near north side, as they called it then, later called Cabrini Green. I went to Waller High School for 1 semester, and then my family moved to the west side, and I graduated from Farragut High School.
Yeah. How did you get involved with the police department?
Well, basically, I had been in the military out in 1962, worked for the VA for a couple of, almost 2 years. Then I drove a CTA Rapid Transit, as they called it. And I saw an ad in the paper that they was hiring police. And I hadn't really had a great desire to be a law enforcement guy. I did always have a bias toward bullies and people that didn't have respect for my neighborhood, the community that I live in. So I just joined because I thought it would be a raise in pay and an opportunity to do some good at the same time.
Now I know from a little bit about you that you were part of the founding membership of the Afro-American Patrolman League. Am I correct on that?
Yes, sir.
You and Renault Robinson.
And a whole bunch more.
You're right, yeah.
Well, not a whole bunch.
Yeah, but I remember,
dozen.
that was a time when young men stood for something. I mean, I don't know what was what was on the mind, but you decided to say there are some changes that need to be made, and you went about the business to try to make those changes. And I think you guys did a wonderful job in doing that. What position are you doing? Anything with the Patrolman League today or not?
Not really. I retired from the police department in 1991. Started going into the prisons. I took over or took off the shelf a not-for-profit corporation called the Positive Anti-Crime Thrust, which initially was the educational arm of the Afro-American Patrolmen's League. It was a way of keeping the community balanced, if you will, in terms of our day-to-day work and our responsibility with the community. So I kept up with the national organization that we had formed in 1972, where we had, in 22 states, 35 major metropolitan areas, we had about 100 organizations. So my interest was more on a national level because of the policy of the criminal justice system and its adverse impact on us as a people nationally, really. And so I started to put the little energy I had left outside of the local group. In fact, Chicago had diversified our action. We had about 6 groups when I retired. And it got to be frustrating just to watch the leadership waning and diversify in such a way that we couldn't be as effective as I thought we could be or should be here in the city.
Is the national group, how are they doing today?
Well, actually, even they had a little split. There's 2 groups, the National Black Police Association, which was the original group, and then they had a little split at the top of leadership. So the second group is an acronym called NABLEO. That's the National Association of Black Law Enforcement Officers, okay?
Yeah.
And so being one of the elders, I'm able to sit in both camps. And I do spend considerable amount of time. Some of the chapters are more active than others. I think our southern region and eastern region is a little more active than our Midwest and West Coast. But they still exist. And unfortunately, they haven't accomplished our overall mission. And that was to make the police behave in the black community. That hasn't happened yet.
Speaking of the Afro-American Patrolman League here in Chicago, how is Mr. Renault Robinson doing?
Oh, Renault is doing as well as a guy our age can do. He's in business, obviously. He's taking on another level of responsibility. We laugh now. He said, "You still doing social work? I got to get some money." So he's got a business that he runs. We keep in touch quite frequently. Some of his younger sons work with me occasionally when I'm teaching criminal justice. I've had a couple of his boys as students, so we keep up with one another.
Mm-hmm. What branch of service were you in?
Army.
Oh, okay,
Yes,
yeah.
I volunteered right after high school.
Now, you are now working in what aspect of the criminal justice system are you and your organization dealing with?
Well, basically, we focused on all 3 pieces. If we don't understand police, courts, and corrections, then we won't understand recidivism. We won't understand the criminalization of us as a people. We won't really understand what kind of fight we're in. So our organization is focused on the 3 entities, police, courts, and corrections, from a prevention, intervention, and a successful reentry strategy. So we're part of a network of organizations. I basically do consulting kind of work. We don't do direct services. We try to make community organizations utilize our expertise in the area of criminal justice. I mean, our people are just in a struggle about the justice system, but very few organizations know exactly how to fight the ills and the evils of a system that has had such a devastating impact on us as a people since slavery, really.
Mm. I was reading a book, Black Robe, White Justice, by the late Judge Bruce Wright. And in his book, he points to something, and you can help me on this, and you tell me if this is true. The Irish police see the police department as theirs, that every Irishman has a right to be a policeman if he wants to.
excuse me.
Yeah.
If you put that theory on the scene of Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
where the Irish population back when I came on the job was about 8% of the city population overall, and they were about 85% of the bosses on the job. They dominated the police and fire in terms of Irish. And a lot of the white ethnic groups, Italians, the Polish, and the Jewish, had separate ethnic organizations when we started the Afro-American Patrolmen's League. Yet none of them could really compete with the Irish clout in terms of how to go upward in the department, how to get the magic phone call to get on the job. So there's a lot of truth to that. And when you think about their history, the police were not the high end of a society. That was the job most people didn't want. So the Irish had experienced, from what I could read in history, an introduction to the real world in terms of feeling discrimination. So they just took the jobs that were available, and then eventually they just took over it as, this is our job. And every historical research that you do in this city specifically, you'll see that they've been in control of the hierarchy of police and fire for many, many years.
Judge Wright is from New York. He was born in New Jersey, and he was speaking of New York. And he called it, in fact, he referred to him as the Irish Mafia.
Well, we had to refer to the coterie here in Chicago as a mafia. When we start to look back at who was our biggest opposition in terms of having the right to have an organization for blacks, who had the clout in terms of not just the police, but we were talking about the prosecutors, we were talking about the judges, which they got that sewed up pretty tight also. Mm-hmm. It was pretty obvious that Irish control in politics and police, that's just part of the political arena, is dominant and prominent. So, if we want to talk about who's running it, we have to just get into real detail about the history of how could something like that be when that population is such a small number in terms of the overall population of the city of Chicago.
Now you speak of your triad here, the police, courts, and the correction system. What part would you recommend the black community understand about their relationship with the police department? I mean, do you deal with it from that point or what?
Well,
when you say police,
it's a complex discussion to have when we realize that police by themselves, as much as we might criticize the police, we know we need some kind of police, so that means we got to talk about how do we control the police. When we talk about the court system, we've got to talk about whether there's equity on the bench. Do we get a fair shake when it comes down to the punishment side of the court system? Do blacks get punished more severely than whites through the court system? Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that there's a double standard. When you look at corrections, in a city like Chicago, where the vast majority of the black individuals going into the penal system are coming out of the black and Hispanic community, specifically the black community, is where I focus at. So we're the inmates inside the prison system. You see the prison population being the economic spend on very, very significantly on for small town America, specifically small town Illinois. So if we don't view it as a system, that one hand washing the other, the police, you can't go to jail, can't go to court rather, without the police getting you first. You can't go to prison without the court getting you first. You can't go back to prison without the police and the courts agreeing that it's time for you to go back. So it's a cycle that I think we haven't learned how to fight. I use a parable. When I was a little young boy, I was going to grammar school, and I come home one day, and I'd been wept up pretty good by a guy. And so my older brother asked me what had happened, and I said, well, he beat me up. He said, well, I said, but he's bigger than I am. He said, well, what's that got to do with it? I said, well, he said, well, how could he just, so when I described it, I said, he put his hand on my head, and every time I swung, I was hitting nothing but his arms. And so my brother said, well, he didn't beat you just because he's big, he beat you because you don't know how to fight big boys. So we don't know how to fight a system that has effectively criminalized us since slavery. And if we don't understand how that happens, we will be doomed to continue to watch prison being built on our backs and our young people being criminalized at a very young age and haunted for the rest of their lives as an ex-felon or ex-felon, etc., to the extent that that system has had a greater impact, adverse impact on us as a people in the last 30 years than anything that we can imagine in America having an impact on us socially, economically, politically, and now spiritually as that particular system. So yeah, you have to take those three together. If you try to separate them, you're not going to understand your role.
Are you having much success in dealing with this, in dealing with the relationship with the police department, the courts, and the correction when dealing with some of these young men and women?
The best way to describe my success is the fact that by the grace of God, I'm still here. The age group of you and I have been to hell and back in America as black men. So in that vein, you know, I can say there's been success. I'm still in my right mind. But to talk about have we had any great impact on the system itself in terms of putting a stop to what that criminalization process does to us, the jury is way out on that one in terms of are we paying attention to the people that can best explain that system to us. That judge you mentioned in terms of black robes, white justice. You know, you have to listen to the people who are practitioners if you want to learn what that agency does rather than have us all in a general conversation. Your expertise is media. Another one of our family may be an expert of an individual that's been to prison and back and understands the evil of prison. Another one may be an educator, doctor, and etc. Well, we have to start using family members' information based on its empirical power and how it educates us so that we are not doomed to continue to repeat history in the same fashion from one generation to the next. So a long answer to a very short question. We need to be in an educational mode right now. Our people are dying from a lack of knowledge. We don't understand how the system works, and therefore we can't protect our children from the system, and we definitely cannot give them the wherewithal to protect their children from that system. Because right now, as I said, I'm sitting here 69 years old, and I've, since that day I signed up to be a Chicago police officer, I've literally watched 3 generations of young men and now more and more young women going through that system right out of school. Some not ever finishing school. And that's a design to that, and I think we need to understand this is not by chance.
Yeah, let me ask you this question. Since you mentioned that, you know, your activity as a policeman, and I realized guys were a little bit more conscious. It's like when I read Justice Wright, Judge Pincham, and others of that period, they all had a different concept about justice. They believed in fairness. That's what they all strived to do, was to make sure that when a man or woman came in, and it didn't matter if they were black or white, but when they came into the system, because the judge, and the reason I said that, Judge Wright points out that there was a guy who was had a struggle with a friend of his who was a prostitute or something, and he and the guy got into a tussle of some kind, and the guy fell and bumped his head. Didn't die or anything then. He got left and went home or wherever they were going. And he later died. The police department were clamoring for him to charge this man, with a serious crime of murder or something. So when the guy came before Judge Wright allowed this man to go on bail, I think, of his own recognizance, and he got a name from that point as being cut him a loose right. But he was saying he was dealing with the 8th Amendment of the Constitution, which says there should not be any excessive bail on a person because that person cannot go out and do anything to try to help their case. That's about, in other words, when you're talking about the police department, how one has to try to learn, people get upset when they see a heinous crime committed, and a judge may say, well, no, this is the bail for that person. But the police react differently, pretending that, that he also pointed out that they brought people in that they knew were not felonies, and they would bring them in on a felony knowing that the judge would throw it out, but they would come out and act as if that the judge had done something wrong. I mean, to me, that would be part of learning how the system operates. Is that what you're talking about? Or?
Well, let's go back to.
I hope you got my question. I realize.
I understand, and you like I said, we're on a subject here that's very complex,
mm-hmm.
and sometimes the only way you can make it make sense is with stories and parables.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to the '60s. Because this judge, in that book, I believe, was published like in the middle of the late 80s.
Yeah, 87, I think it was.
So you got to go back to what would put that manner of man,
mm-hmm.
or woman for that matter, on the bench in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
What would make them...
Speaking of him, he said when Mayor Lindsay came and told him he was going to be a judge, he said, I can't accept that job. His mother is white, his dad is black. He had a scholarship to Princeton. And when he got to Princeton and he found out that he was a black man, scholarship went away. He couldn't go to Notre Dame either, none of that stuff. So this is the period he comes out of. And he said that he told Mayor Lindsay, he said, I can't accept that job. I don't have that kind of money to pay you for judgeship. I mean, that's the kind of system that they've been operating,
We talking about justice in America, right?
Right,
we talking about how do you get to be a judge?
Yeah, right.
And how do they make sure they're picking the right kind of guy?
There you go, right.
So go to the police department
mm-hmm.
for a second. A guy like me, 1965, I've been in the military. Right. I come off the streets of Chicago, very savvy in terms of my community, its
mm-hmm.
needs,
mm-hmm.
its deficiencies, etc. And it just so happened that the civil rights movement was prominent.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm coming in on the coattail of people's struggle.
Right.
And the conscientious level of police officers back then, prior to the organization that came about as the Afro-American Patrolmen's League, we always had guardians and other kind of organizations, but they were not in tune with the struggle, mm-hmm. so to speak, that black people were in terms of the civil rights movement. So the police department made some mistakes, in my opinion, by thinking that they could just take a black and turn them into some kind of mm-hmm. obedient, non-challenging mind. Because mm-hmm. some of us really had, a few cats had been, a couple of them had been a career.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, a few like me had just narrowly escaped the Cuban crisis and the mm-hmm. Berlin crisis. Mm-hmm. But I understood paramilitary functions.
Right.
I knew what the police was for. But there was a certain amount of discretion that we had to begin to exercise on the street in order for people working with us in that capacity to realize that we were just as serious about protecting the community that produced us as they were about protecting the community that produced them. All right. Now let's go to the bench for a second. Mm-hmm. The discretionary power of judges back in that day was still intact. I mean, if you had a judge that had some savvy and some moxie or some fortitude, they had to make decisions based on conscience because that's all they had to work with. Mm-hmm. It hadn't been put in place how to program you yet. Mm-hmm. The laws had not been changed to take the discretionary power away from the judges by giving some predisposed sentencing policies, mm-hmm. 3 strikes and you're out, mm-hmm. and all that sort of thing that just kind of just broke the judges down. The discretion of a juvenile court judge, they don't have it anymore. I mean, people when they get ready, they try, your child as an adult. And they may have to go through some changes trying to try a white kid as an adult, unless it's a heinous crime that everybody can agree that's what it is. Well, if we're going to talk about what manner of person has come about in the 20 years since Mayor Washington, whose era ended prematurely in 1987, even the mayors of the cities where black mayors were coming about had a bigger challenge than any mayor in America in terms of dealing with urban problems and urban crises as people being produced by their community. Well, let's just fast forward now to 2010. What has happened to the police? I remember distinctly during the late Mayor Sawyer's watch. Mayor Washington had transitioned out. A police officer got shot and his partner got shot by what they call a crazed cab driver. And he had killed one and wounded one. And the one that he wounded, these were both white officers and a black cab driver doing the shooting. One officer crawled up on the car and was trying to hide from this guy, and he's looking for him. He said, I know one of them got away from him. I'm trying to kill him. And a black woman put herself between that shooter and that policeman under that cab because her attitude towards the police was, these are our helpers. This is the community that I live in, need the police. Now, we're just talking back as far as 1989, 88 rather. You think you could get a black woman to step in front and hide a policeman from a shooter today? The attitude has changed. People have found out that the people who we're looking for to protect us in the system called justice is not functioning properly.
Right.
And so these are examples of individuals, the people you mentioned, the Judge Penchams of this world. These were individuals that were almost a harbinger for what needed to come about in terms of reproducing themselves, but it was an aberration in terms of what to be expected. And as soon as they found out that a judge like that existed, they look coterie, they meet just like we be calling ourselves meet. And they said, this guy here is a bigger hindrance than he is a helper. And then they start trying to figure out how to hurt you. And either by election or unelection, intimidating you to the extent that if you don't learn the game, if you don't understand what we do with courts, you don't fit in here. So I'm on one of the biggest plantations in the world in Illinois right now. When it comes down to the discretion of the judges, the discretion of the police, the treatment of people inside these prisons, and our awareness in terms of the community level of awareness on how this system is functioning against us. And I think, just to kind of mention another book, there's a new book out that just come out, and it kind of coattails on what Black Robes and White Justice was speaking on, and it's called The New Jim Crow. And the author is a former Supreme Court Justice clerk. Michelle Alexander is a black female lawyer, but she has captured in a very succinct way what Judge Justice Wright was alluding to over 20 years ago, saying, do we understand how this thing happens? How can a judge of such integrity become labeled as a negative in a system that's supposed to mete out justice?
Right.
How can a police officer who says treat everybody right and specifically don't mistreat my folks become something of a negative nature instead of a positive nature? And I think that's the challenge of America today, Mr. Cheatham. I think when we start talking about people's willingness to obey the law, to have confidence in police, to have confidence in a court system and a corrections, a misnomer corrections system, we're gonna have to realize that you've had some leadership out here that has given people a justifiable reason to doubt whether you have the best interest of poor people, specifically black people and Hispanics, in mind when you start talking about how you are blind injustice, you know. So I just think that the bar has been raised. I think these authors, as these people in the field that you're in terms of communications, are being compelled now to make people tell the truth about the matter, no matter who it is.
There's a book, I can't think of the author's name now. I was watching it, and she was on C-SPAN. And it ties in with the police superintendent here in Chicago, who feels that the citizenry is not snitching. Okay, he wants to get rid of the so-called non-snitch law, but at the same time, the police will not snitch on the corrupt and wrongdoing policemen. He never said anything about that.
Well, listen to the irony of such a declaration. For the most part, lawyers don't tell on each other.
Right.
Judges don't tell on each other. Doctors don't tell each other. School teachers don't tell on each other. Now, why you gonna make people? And then, you know, the real serious nature of that declaration is, we've seen in our lifetime what happens to people when organized crime is after them. Even the police can't protect with witness protection people. So when people tell you on a block, say, look, man, I got to live here. Don't try to make me just automatically commit suicide out here. Why don't you have a process by which I can give you information without you having some fool come and ring my bell 5 minutes after I give you the information in a uniform car, talking about I need some follow-up information. Sometimes that's inadvertent and just done by a fool, but sometimes it's intentional because you got corrupt people working with the mafioso. So it depends on what you're trying to get people to do. So of course, people need to take the responsibility for trying to make their own community safe. But if they're looking at you arresting, excuse me, handful of youngsters on the corner dealing drugs at 9 o'clock in the morning, they see that same individual back on the street by 11 o'clock that night. If not him, a replacement. And they saying, well, now, that ain't going nowhere. What's going to happen to me? And you can see all over the country where people have been run out of their homes, murdered in their homes by these same little thugs who the police are, quote unquote, investigating. So we need to really get real serious when the superintendent like Weiss, who's come to Chicago, I've never seen him actually reach out for some of the old-timer police officers from these most troubled communities and say, why don't y'all advise me? Don't ask no employee, because he's trying to go along to get along.
Right, you're trying to keep his job. You're
going to keep a mistake going if you come in town. And in Chicago specifically, the unions have kowtowed these people in this town when it comes to police misconduct. I mean, anytime a fraternal order police or any other organization can talk about people ought to be snitching and they don't snitch on their own, it's a fallacy. It's not fair. Anytime a union can decide whether the police in a particular community is going to work a full day or half a day, whether they can bargain or negotiate to get, because they're seasoned veterans, out the community and send some inexperienced individuals in there to protect the community that's got such a complex problem with snitching. We need to just start talking about, does the superintendent or the mayor, for that matter, or the council really want to know how to get on top of something? They're not talking to the people who got to live with it. They're talking to each other. So it's kind of difficult to get young people to believe in a system when you say, come and tell me about it, and 5 minutes after you leave, somebody know I done talked to you already. You ain't even, your tire tracks ain't dried up in front of my house. And the word on the street already that I talked to the police. How do that happen? How does that happen? In a city like Chicago, it's corruption. That's what it is. So until we get serious about the issues that make people not want to talk to the police, until we get serious about how innocent people are being drugged into the criminal justice system, kicking and screaming because they didn't have adequate legal representation or didn't know their rights or couldn't be protected from police who don't mind locking folks up because of their race or because of their plight in life. We're going to have that kind of issue. And I think the superintendent in this city needs to realize that your information is limited. You're operating under a political shadow in terms of corruption and brutality. And people are reluctant to talk to you because they don't know whose side you're on yet. And that's just a fact of life.
And as one author pointed out that policemen know that John over there is the one who's selling the drugs. But John is an informant for the police department. And John is able to, they will leave John out to go after you or I, who may be a bigger fish, so they say, that they're looking for. And John, that's how a lot of innocent men ended up on death row here in Illinois when the Governor Ryan decided to bag it off. And this author was pointing out that this is what's happening, you know, across the country, that they know that these guys who are out here, you spoke of the 9 o'clock little group of guys who are out, you know, selling drugs. The police know they're there, and they allow them to be there to continue to do this kind of stuff, because sometimes it's maybe that they hope that this guy will lead them somewhere else, but in the end it never does, you know, really come to anything worthwhile.
You and I have been around for a minute.
Right.
And we know that there's been police, there's been judges, there's been lawyers, there's been politicians indicted, prosecuted, and sent to prison in a corrupt environment. It happens all day, every day. I don't think the serious nature of corruption in Chicago has been looked at from the standpoint, well, I shouldn't say it hasn't been looked at, hasn't been addressed from the standpoint of seriously trying to put a stop to corruption. And drug trade is as big as any industry in America right now.
True.
And we need to realize that these little street corner hustlers are not the problem. They're a harbinger for things to come. They've been effective in criminalizing almost 3/4 of our kids with that system. But the fact of the matter is, corruption in Chicago, corruption in the state of Illinois, corruption in America is a major issue. And drug trafficking is a major contributing factor. Now, we've got a lot of people that spend an awful lot of time building a lot of prisons, but we don't have a whole lot of track record accomplishment in terms of treatment for drug addiction. We don't have a lot of accomplishment for balancing the equities in terms of the double standard of enforcement when it comes to drug trafficking. I mean, so we need to just stop trying to put the weight of that corruption on the back of black drug dealers. I mean, I'm the first one to say that we as a community need to put our own level of tolerance in terms of what we're going to let happen in our community. But to expect the police to adequately enforce corruption when it's the volume of money that we're talking about in America on drug trafficking, I think we're kidding ourselves. And I think we need to stop blaming the economy for the underworld activities if we're not ready to deal with how high up that corruption goes. And I think that America is being challenged now in terms of its internal lifeline called the people of America. If America continues to let corrupt politicians and gangsterism prevail in these cities, I don't see how they can survive another generation. Excuse me. Another generation of the narcotic addiction problem, the corruption that goes with the trafficking of narcotics, and the reluctance on the part of the policymakers to realize where criminalization departs from common sense and where treatment becomes the order of the day for people who are addicted to narcotics, and don't keep mixing those two things up. And I think that the corruption in America, the corruption in Chicago as it relates to drug trafficking, I think is so replete. And I think that black people and to a great extent some of the Hispanic community and some of the poor white community are just victims of an economy that kind of dictates I'm going to eat some kind of way. And I'm not excusing it.
Yeah.
I'm just simply saying that the reality of this thing is the corrupt politicians are stronger in the Congress than the non-corrupts. America is suffering from apathy and denial. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of our elected officials will not challenge corruption the way that they should. They'd rather act as if it don't exist and keep trying to skirt it. Well, drugs has a way, the same way alcohol and any other substance has. It'll drive all y'all crazy if you don't get it under control. Mm. And so right now, I think the carnage of not addressing the corruption aspect of drug trafficking in America is coming back to haunt the whole system. And I'm not a naysayer, but I don't believe that decent people gonna get out of this mess they in if they don't start taking on corruption from a realistic standpoint as opposed to a racial standpoint. Mm-hmm. They've criminalized us as a race. Yeah. I mean, they have effectively made us a business. And it's a cycle. Off the street, first out of school, mm-hmm. into the drug arena, whether you're dealing or just with him. Mm-hmm. Some of these little kids running around following the cat that's got the pocket full of look like a whole bunch of money. Now they just got a big $5 bill on a bunch of singles. But he looked like he was a legitimate businessman for a long time. The truth of the matter is, ain't no money in drug trafficking, not at that level. Yeah, sure. So we just have to kind of come to grips. Our leadership, as far as I'm concerned, needs to be challenged. I mean, we got some preachers that are shameful in terms of what they don't do to help a community in distress. We've got some politicians that are just shameless mm-hmm. in terms of what they will not do to address corruption and the sort in urban America. And I think that you know, as a 70-year-old man, or almost 70, God willing, I've seen enough to know that it ain't a lot of places to hide no more. Mm-hmm. You can't hide in the church. Yeah. You can't hide in the back room of the court. Right. You can't hide in a mansion. You know, there is Joe Louis who say you can run, but you can't hide from this one.
Can't hide in
suburbia. And I think that
yeah.
either good people mm-hmm. are going to claim the right to make the rules again, or they're going to keep on suffering denial at the hands of their corrupt politicians and their corrupt leaders and their corrupt business people. And America is new, relatively new to the society. We ain't but 200-some years old. Yeah. So we ain't caught no hell yet. The black people catching hell, yeah. Poor white folks catching hell, few Hispanics that are here catching hell, but the real white people in America, they ain't caught no hell like they finna catch. Yeah. And I'm making that prediction only because I just believe the vast majority of I use the police as a microcosm of society. Every aspect of our society is represented within the ranks of the police. Mm-hmm. It's just a little small microcosm of the bigger picture. Right. And so the vast majority of white police who are just deaf mutes about corruption. I think Frank Serpico said it. Yeah. You know? Yeah. Frank Serpico made it real plain. Right, he said, you know, why should the majority of us let the small group of corrupt people make us all bad off, make us feel bad, get us killed, and etc. Well, you see what they try to do to him, right? Oh, yeah. So I'm saying right now, whistleblowing and is being used by, you said the superintendent wondering why people won't snitch. What you mean by snitching? Ain't nobody suicidal. They looking at the corrupt level of where you came into a city as a newcomer. I bet you right now you didn't realize what you were up against until you got in them back rooms and they started talking about how police one community as opposed to another one. I bet he's trying to figure out how to get up out of here. Yeah. But until he go, he need to be talking to some people that can tell him a fair way of meting out punishment as the executive branch of government and stop letting people give a double standard. You can't let the union run it one way and then expect the community to respect you when they're being violated by the very police that we expect to protect us. So, you know, it's a moral call.
Right. It is from the way in which I see the the Fraternal Order of Police, and I realize it's fraternal, it's not really a union, it's a fraternal, you know, a little group of guys who say, they don't, I can never recall seeing where they have ever condemned a police officer, even though he was totally wrong. You know?
That's such a true statement.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think back on Chicago and how corrupt Chicago is, when the Afro-American Patrolmen's League came about in 1968 after the assassination of Dr. King, every ethnic group in Chicago had, as I said, the Irish, the Polish, the Italian, the Jewish American Associations. Everybody kind of understood that the yoke on them was to be of service to the community in general. But the Irish people worried about the Irish community. The Jewish people worried about, and we were the ones who were saying, well, y'all all neglected me, you know. But as it turned out, they all got compromised. The Fraternal Order of Police had less police in Chicago than any one of those groups. How did they get to be the sole bargaining agent? And what is their reputation nationally? Negative. In terms of addressing the issues that make all police look bad. I mean, it ain't no sin to say, I believe that 95, 96, maybe 97% of the police really just trying to have a job. But they ain't gonna blow no whistle on each other, because that ain't how they play. You'll find your head floating in the sewer somewhere, talking about telling on corrupt police as the police. So they gotta figure out whether they gonna serve unjust master as the fraternal order, or whether they're going to be consistent. Because right now, you know, I think it's a sin that the average white officer, who are the majority in most police departments, could actually sit back and blame it on the union that they working in an unsafe environment because people just don't trust them before they even open their mouth because of the uniform, because they ain't standing up for what's right. Now, will they ever get around to that? By way of the Fraternal Order of Police, I doubt it. Because every argument I've heard out of the mouth of the union has been one of protect him right or wrong, he's one of our members. And so for us as a society to expect a Fraternal Order of Police to correct this problem, the politicians, if they part of the manner born in terms of that little inside coterie that's corrupt, and you sitting down there in Congress year after year watching people lose faith in government, don't be surprised if America goes up in flames one day.
That's true. And it won't be just in one little community.
No, I mean, they may think we the, see, that's the thing about black people, we are resilient. We can take a whooping. I mean, we've been taking it since slavery. But if you pay attention to us, our resiliency is based on principle. We normally end up telling people what's right. That's now, true. If you can say, okay, well, look at all these black criminals. Yeah, I look at causative factors of crime. If they were some big time criminals, I'd say, okay, treat them just like you treat the rest of them. But don't tell me you got a double standard for criminals. Don't tell me that an individual with a $2 bag on the street is supposed to get more time than a guy that's bringing kilos over here. That's true. You know, so I'm saying, don't kid people. No, you know, we had a junction now. You and I. Well, I won't put you in my age group. You're almost there.
I'm in your generation, so you know. So yeah, you know, it's good to be here.
We're in a generation where truth matters. I mean, you know, it really matters. So if you're dependent upon a system called the American justice system to protect all of the other trappings of America, you better do something about the corrupt nature of this system. And I don't, you know, I'm on my last leg here. I tell anybody, you know, I die trying. But I think for generations of white people in America, they need to realize that it ain't just a black problem no more.
It's not. It's an American problem.
It's an American problem. You know? And if you think for 1 second that the world is not watching America, then you're kidding yourself. And you know, I don't know how this is going to play out, but greed and corruption, the God that I serve says eventually it's going to catch up with you. And if you compromising on those kind of principles as a group, then you got coming whatever going to come to you. The only reason at 70 years old I ain't tired, because they still dealing with my kids before they even come out the womb. They criminalizing our race now. And that's why I say, you know, when we start talking about what should we be doing right now, let's keep the church honest And if it ain't honest, get out the church.
Right.
Let's keep the educational system honest. If it ain't, homeschool our kids.
Right.
If it ain't giving us jobs, then create some jobs for ourselves.
That's true.
Stop electing people to office that you ain't got no accountability mechanism to hold them accountable by. And I'm just saying, okay, I'm on my way out of here, but the God I serve said, you know, in the end, my people gonna be all right. So I ain't saying all black people gonna be all right, but if you're a corrupt black and you wanna be with corrupt people, go on and be with them. You not a corrupt white person, but you ain't thinking it's worth talking about because they're just victimizing me. Yeah. You the fool.
That's true.
So I'm just saying, okay, let's see how it play out. Because I'm on the last chapter for me. I'm sitting in the catbird seat, Mr. Cheatham, looking at this thing from a perspective of righteousness. The Afro-American Patrolmen's League had a principle it was organized around.
That's true.
We didn't talk about black and white from the perspective of all black was okay. We said if a black is doing something wrong, use the double standard on both of them. Don't just use it on him. Now you tell me you got some black police out here dealing drugs. I say I bet you they working for a white drug dealer. And if they ain't working for a white drug dealer, then you show me the Latino that they working for. Or show me anybody, because I ain't seen no blacks with no drug capacity for nothing but distribution. I ain't seen them grow not one. Any kind of thing you see us growing, it better be food right in through here. That's just an old man talking to another
There's
brother.
nothing wrong with that. I'm enjoying the conversation, you know. Now, in your organization, now, what are you going into the prisons? Are you going into the schools and talking to the children?
Our biggest student, our website is www.communitysafety.org. I just want people to start looking.
Say it again.
www.communitysafety, that's all one word, .org. Now, we've got young brothers that's replacing me that are beginning to design the website and get into this modern day communication process, because that's about all my age left to do is to do some talking. So, you know, when I speak from a position of experience that says if the criminal justice system is not for just us to be punished, as Reverend Bailey says in his dissertation, then show me how double standards don't count when we start talking about removing corruption, removing brutality, and giving these young people a reason to want to be a United States. If you're going to keep dividing people with your corrupt politicians and educations, et cetera, then the only reason I exist, Mr. Cheatham, is because I don't think I was finished yet. The prison system to me was an enlightenment. I retired in 1991. I started going into the prisons. Number one, I had family in there. Number two, I know some people in there that didn't have no business in there. And I knew there was some people in there that I hope did never come out.
So you know the whole spectrum.
That was clear enough for me to go up in there, right? But I went in there with a little cadre of individuals that represented a remnant of righteousness in terms of some clergy, some community organization people, some retired law enforcement people, some formerly incarcerated people, who said the system is living off the backs of poor people, specifically black people. So I want to go in there and see whether or not is there anything inside the walls of the prison that's salvageable and worth saving. And you know what I found out? 95% of the people in there would not be up in there if it wasn't for some kind of crime related to some kind of economic issue, whether they own drugs. And you and I have witnessed in our lifetime the proliferation of the prison system in the state of Illinois since 1980. And the President of the United States came out with the attitude that we're gonna criminalize criminals, we're gonna fight drugs, we're gonna, all this stuff. And those strategies ended up being just us.
Yep.
And so inside the prison is just one dimension of the positive anti-crime thrust focus. We're saying, what can we do inside the prison that will prepare individuals to come back out here with a renewed attitude and a greater understanding of what took them in there in the first place? Even if they were wrongfully convicted, they need to understand the system that got them in. We looked at the corrections cycle as police, courts, and corrections, and then back again. Recidivism is what drove me up into this. Recidivism, we're saying, why do the same people keep going back to prison and the people who need to go don't seem to get there? And so corruption became a focus even in the prisons. And as we've seen in the state of Illinois, they done built a whole lot of prisons here, but we done seen some prison chiefs on their way to the penitentiary up in here. We done seen some governors on the way to the penitentiary up in here.
Well, Governor Ryan shouldn't be there.
Governor Ryan was one of the, as far as I'm concerned, one of their whipping boys.
Yes.
And I think because he opened up, and some people say his motive wasn't pure, he didn't.
Well,
he
as far as I'm concerned, it was right.
Well,
whether
one
it was pure
thing
or
about
not,
it, just
right.
what I'm saying, when the results are positive, you need to look at not so much as was the motive right, but to how to do that again, how to make it happen again. I'd like to see the present governor get as adamant about corruption on people who ain't in there yet.
Yeah. Well, I see Quinn as being a phony. I see him as not being a genuine anyway. I think he's phony.
The jury for me indicates that black people specifically, and I can't speak about any other race the way that I can speak about being a black man for almost 70 years.
Yeah.
Black people need to realize that there's a double standard in the justice system in America. And we don't need to be talking about I'm in party A or party B. We need to realize that corrupt politicians are in every party in America.
That's right.
And if we don't realize what our value for the vote is, we need to start talking about why we shouldn't be voting. And since we know the system runs on votes, we need to start getting more educated on how to control what we vote for.
You can roll the keys, the credits anytime. We're going to keep talking. Go right on.
Well, the bottom line is, Mr. Cheatham, I'm so happy that you're a part of the communication system. I think people are going to have to start to pay attention to who's speaking truth to power. And the freedom of the press, or the freedom of speech and all of that doesn't have any meaning in America unless we take advantage of it in a crisis like now and speak truth to power.
Sure.
And I think that people who are into this from a racial perspective, I say to y'all, if you think trying to kill black people is going to solve your problem, you're the biggest damn fool on earth. Yeah. If you think protecting your cousin because he's high up in the politician arena and he's corrupt and you think he's going to save you, you're wrong.
Right. And, I want to thank you for being a guest.